Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We will begin in just a moment. Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The time is 5:02 p.m. Eastern, and we will now start the public scoping meeting for the environmental review of the Empire Wind Construction and Operations Plan for Commercial Lease OCS-A-0512, offshore New York. Thank you everyone for participating. My name is Jennifer Piggott, and I will serve as the facilitator for today's meeting. I'm with ICF, the third-party contractor supporting the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, or BOEM. I do want to note that this meeting is being recorded. If you do not wish to be a part of this recording, please disconnect from the call or the Zoom meeting. The recording of this meeting will be posted on the project website. Let's review the agenda for today's meeting. We will begin with a series of opening remarks and presentations, which should take about an hour. First, Jim Bennett, the program manager for BOEM's Renewable Energy Program, will provide a few opening remarks. Next, I'm sure that many of us have become very familiar with Zoom over the last year, but we'll review a few tips for the Zoom platform, and I'll point out some key features we'll be using during today's meeting. We will then move into a few presentations. The first presentation is a brief background and history on the offshore energy leasing process given by Luke Feinberg of BOEM. Following Luke, Brandy Sanganet, the BOEM NEPA team lead for this project, will provide an overview of the environmental review process. That will be followed by a presentation by Laura McLean with the New York Department of State. And finally, Laura Morales with Empire Wind will provide an overview of the proposed project. At that point, we'll take a quick break so everyone can stretch their legs before we convene to take public comments. Following the formal public comments, we will take another quick break and conclude with a question and answer session. We have a full agenda, so let's get started. Again, thank you for joining us today. I would now like to introduce Jim Bennett, the Chief of the Office of Renewable Energy Programs with BOEM, for some introduction remarks. Jim?
Thank you, Jennifer. Can everybody hear me okay?
Hear you loud and clear.
Great. Good afternoon or good evening, everyone. And thank you for joining us. Again, my name is Jim Bennett, and I am the Program Manager for the Office of Renewable Energy Programs here at the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, or BOEM. I'd like to welcome you to the second of three virtual scoping meetings for the Empire Wind Energy Project Draft Environmental Impact Statement. This virtual environment during COVID has proven to be an effective alternative to in-person meetings. Our BOEM team has realized considerable success, and I am sure that that will be the case today. We are here to hear from you about the Empire Wind Energy Project and the environmental analysis to be conducted under the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. For those who aren't familiar with BOEM, we're the bureau within the Department of the Interior that oversees the development of our energy and mineral resources on almost 2.5 billion acres of the nation's Outer Continental Shelf, or OCS. The OCS extends from the 3-mile line of state jurisdiction out to the full extent of the EEZ, or Exclusive Economic Zone, approximately 200 miles offshore. We at BOEM are responsible for the expeditious and orderly development of the energy resources of the OCS, including renewables like wind. It's our job to ensure this development is done in an environmentally and economically responsible way. Our review and possible approval of the Empire Wind Project is considered a major federal action, and as a result, we are preparing an Environmental Impact Statement, EIS, under the National Environmental Policy Act. The NEPA process helps ensure that all relevant information and analysis is included in decision-making. So this meeting is an opportunity for us to hear your concerns and information regarding the scope of the environmental analysis. Further, the BOEM team will also be available to answer your questions. But this is the time, your time to speak. We consider public input to be a critical component of safe and responsible offshore development, and your thoughts on this matter are valuable. The development of the offshore industry over the past decade or so has varied a lot, but one constant has been our efforts to ensure stakeholder and public involvement. Your participation and feedback today is essential to BOEM's renewable energy program and plays a vital role in our environmental analysis of the proposed project. We look forward to your thoughts about the scope of the draft environmental impact statement, or draft EIS. Thank you very much, and back to you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Jim, for those remarks. I want to take a minute or two to review the features that we'll be using during our Zoom meeting today. At any time during the meeting, if you need assistance with the Zoom platform, you can use the chat feature located at the bottom of your screen to message the meeting host, or you can send an email to empirewind@icf.com. We appreciate your participating in this online public scoping meeting. As Jim said, we would much rather be with you in person, but with the current conditions, we want to provide all the information we can while protecting everyone's health. We will work to conduct this meeting in a manner that closely resembles that of an in-person meeting. Please make a note of the phone number for the meeting today. The phone number is 1-888-788-0099. Meeting ID 894-0024-0625. Password 74245413. If you experience difficulty with your internet connection at any point during the meeting, you can call this number to listen to the meeting. Additionally, please note that individual internet connections and bandwidths vary, and that may impact your viewing experience this evening. We recommend closing all apps and programs and limiting other streaming or downloads while you're participating in the meeting. Finally, we're running this meeting using Zoom webinar, which mutes all participants and restricts video feeds. When we get to the public comment and question and answer portion of today's meeting, the meeting host can unmute you. For any media representatives that join the meeting today, please contact Stephen Boutwell, the Public Information Officer, at Stephen, STEPHEN, .Boutwell, BOUTWELL, at BOEM, BOEM.gov, G-O-V. Before we begin, I would like to review some ground rules for today's online public scoping meeting. As previously stated, we'll provide several presentations before accepting formal comments, and BOEM will answer any clarifying questions raised during the meeting. When we get to the formal comment period during today's call, I'll call on people who requested to make a public comment when they registered. All names will be called in the order in which you received your registration. After all of those folks have commented, I will ask if anyone else would like to make a comment. You would then use the raise hand feature on the Zoom platform, or if you're calling in from a phone, you will press *9. I will call on people to comment in the order in which they've raised their hands. During the comment period, I will post the names of the next 5 speakers in the chat so you can see when your turn is coming up. When I call your name, you'll receive a pop-up box on your screen, or for those on the phone, you will hear a prompt that will allow you to unmute yourself to make your comment. Throughout today's meeting, if you think of a question that you need clarified, please type your question into the question answer box on the Zoom platform. When we get to the question answer portion of today's meeting, BOEM staff will answer your clarifying questions. Please be sure to use the Q&A function and not the chat feature for your questions today. Also, please note, when we receive your question and the team begins working on an answer, we'll move your question to the dismiss category. And then once ready, we will read your question and provide an answer aloud. We will review all of this again before the public comment and the question and answer session later in today's meeting. Please keep in mind that this meeting is being recorded and transcribed, and I would ask that there is no inappropriate language this evening. We do have a large number of participants on the call and who previously registered to speak, so we ask that everyone keep their comments to no more than 5 minutes. I would note that there is one additional virtual public scoping meeting scheduled, and scoping comments can be submitted through regulations.gov. All comments, whether received orally or in writing, are weighted equally. We appreciate the opportunity to share these project updates and the environmental process with all of you. We wish that we could be together in person, but we're glad to come together virtually. Again, the purpose of this virtual public scoping meeting is to share information about the project and to receive public scoping comments. We're now going to start the presentation for today's meeting. Our first presenter is Luke Feinberg of BOEM. Luke?
Thank you, Jennifer. Hi, everybody. My name is Luke Feinberg, and I am the BOEM project coordinator for the Empire Wind lease area. It's often said you need to know where you've been in order to know where you're going. So today, I'll be providing an overview of the 6-year planning and leasing process that led to the development of the Empire Wind lease area, the subject of today's meeting. Hopefully, this information will help inform your comments. Next slide. So this slide here depicts our renewable energy leasing process and its 4 stages: planning and analysis, leasing, site assessment, and construction and operations. And if you see that area in orange there, the BOEM environmental and technical reviews, that is the point at which we are in with the Empire Wind project. Again, the focus of today's meeting. For this presentation, in terms of the history, you can press next there. We'll focus on what's around this red box, the planning and analysis and the leasing portion of the process. Next slide. So if you zoom into that process, there are a few notable milestones. The first is the request for interest in the upper left-hand corner. Then a call for information and nominations, the area identification process. And in the middle of that process, after area identification and designation of wind energy areas, you have 2 parallel processes that begin. First is the development of leasing documents, a proposed and final sale notices, and an environmental assessment. And after those are completed, a lease sale is conducted. And I would note that the renewable energy task forces are involved throughout this process to exchange information and to help inform BOEM's decision making. Next slide. So how does this particular lease area fit into our process? Well, this slide tries to provide a high-level overview, and we'll go into some of the details. Things really started with an initial task force meeting in November of 2010, and the process officially started with a request from the New York Power Authority for a particular portion of the Outer Continental Shelf to be leased for renewable energy. A task force meeting was held in April of 2012 to further refine that request. And in June 2012, NYPA basically submitted an update of the original request. Now, when BOEM receives an unsolicited lease request, our regulations require us to determine if there's anyone else who would be interested in leasing that particular spot on the ocean. And if there is no interest, it is leased through our non-competitive leasing process. So to answer this question of competitiveness, BOEM published a request for interest in January of 2013. And it turns out we did receive competitive interest, so we proceeded through our competitive leasing process. And to help inform that, a task force meeting was held in September of 2013. And we received information from that meeting to help form our call for information and nominations, as well as a notice of intent for an environmental assessment, which was published in May of 2014. Now, we received a lot of great information in response to that call, and along with coordination with relevant state, local, and federal agencies, we designated a wind energy area in March of 2016. So with that wind energy area, things moved along. The proposed sale notice was published in June of that year, a final sale notice in September, and a lease sale was held just in time before the holiday season of 2016. Next slide. So going to some of the specifics here, the unsolicited lease requests that started this process from the New York Power Authority included up to 194 3.6 megawatt turbines in the area located between these traffic separation schemes depicted here. So the traffic separation schemes are in pink, and the area of focus is that green and orange area. The request for interest published in January 2013 not only identified competitive interest, but also highlighted some key issues about this site: navigation safety, commercial fisheries, and visual impacts. Next slide. Now, this leasing process here is unique in that we didn't see much of a difference between the initial areas outlined in the RFI and what was included in the eventual lease areas. This is largely due to the due diligence performed by NYPA and the relative conflicts in the region. And as you can see here, the call area and the wind energy area include the same area, right? And the environmental assessment was conducted in a manner that assessed the effects of leasing, site characterization, and site assessment on that particular area. And again, that was done in June of 2016. Next. Navigational safety was and is a key issue for this lease area. And to inform our decision-making process, BOEM conducted a robust analysis of the traffic in that portion of the New York Bight. Analysis of vessels per aliquot per year was conducted. So if you see the squares there with hotter colors have more vessel activity relative over a period of a year than areas of cooler colors. And that showed that we have similar traffic patterns across years. So these are sort of the highways of the ocean, and they're navigation corridors that are maintained by the US Coast Guard, and people do use them. A low number of vessels do actually traverse the area in question, the lease area in question. But there is certainly a concern about setback from the potential lease area and these traffic separation schemes directly to the north and south. Next slide. The use of the wind energy area as a fishery was identified as a priority in BOEM's deconflicting process. In particular, it was noted that communication between future lessees and the commercial fisheries industry was a critical step towards potential coexistence between the two industries. Next slide. Now, a proposed sale notice is a great name, in my opinion, as it very much outlines what it is. It's a proposal for an upcoming sale, including the document itself includes the area proposing for sale, the auction process, and the financial terms. In this case, BOEM published the area identified by NYPA at just over 81,000 acres and proposed an ascending bid auction format. Next slide. Next slide, please. There we go, perfect. Once we got all the comments back from the proposed sale notice, that a final sale notice was published in October of 2016. And specifically in response to comments from NIMS regarding the ecological significance of Cholera Bank. And I actually, if you go back one slide, we'll highlight where that Cholera Bank area is. Right there. And if you go one slide forward, you'll notice that the final sale notice did not include that area. And that's because of those comments submitted by the National Marine Fisheries Service. And so BOEM did remove 5 aliquots from the final lease area offered in the final sale notice. And this resulted in an area of 79,350 acres. The final sale notice included notes to potential bidders that future mitigation measures may be applied to development in the lease area as it related to maritime navigation, fisheries, and visual impacts. Specifically, BOEM required no surface occupancy in portions of the lease area that were transected by a 1 nautical mile setback line. So as you can see in this image here, if there's a There's a 1 nautical mile buffer from those traffic separation schemes, and BOEM is restricting any physical surface objects to be built there. And this was also the first commercial lease in which BOEM included a fisheries communication plan and fisheries liaison requirement. Additionally, BOEM altered the auction format in the final sale notice to include multiple factor bidding and offered a 10% bidding credit for entities that qualified as a government authority. Next slide. The auction was held in December of 2016, and it was the highest grossing and longest auction to date. The auction started with 6 participants, lasted 33 rounds over 2 days, and resulted in a high bid of over $42 million. Next. And it shows the auction result here. And that auction, it was won by Statoil Wind, which is now known as Equinor. Next slide. So the Empire Wind Construction Operations Plan was, the revised version was submitted in April, and the updated PDE in June. And actually, we recently submitted or received a updated PDE or updated COP in entirety in July, and that has just been posted to our website right there at boem.gov/empirewind. And BOEM can approve, disapprove, or approve the COP with conditions. And that will be done after the environmental impact statement is complete and will be documented by the record of decision. So thank you so much for your time and attention. I'm happy to answer any questions you have through the Q&A function.
Great, thank you, Luke. Our next presenter is Brandy Stanganet with BOEM. Brandy?
Sorry, I had to find myself to unmute myself. Let me start the video. There we go. Sorry about that. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you. Take it away.
Okay, great. Good evening. My name is Brandy Stanganet, and I'm an environmental coordinator with BOEM. Thank you for attending tonight's Empire Wind scoping meeting. Tonight, I'll be talking about the National Environmental Policy Act process, BOEM's approach to the analysis of the construction and operations plan, and how you can provide input into the process. We are excited about tonight's turnout. We have 106 attendees from multiple agencies, industries, and the public. Just to name a few of these that have joined us tonight, we have energy developers, unions, recreational users, the fishery industry, consultants, nonprofits, state agencies, news organizations, and all those from the general public. We thank you for your time and interest in our project. Next slide, please. BOEM uses a multi-phased approach to grant access to ocean areas that may be suitable for wind development. The figure provided describes the phases and amount of time each step generally takes to lease, review, approve, and construct an offshore wind facility on the outer continental shelf. The process begins with the identification of potential areas for wind development, indicated by everything before the blue ribbon, which Luke Feinberg went over in great detail in his presentation. Following the completion of the leasing phase, surveys are done to determine if the leased area is suitable for wind farm construction and to identify what physical, cultural, and natural resources are present within the lease area. These surveys serve as the backbone of knowledge and aid in the development of the construction and operations plan. The construction and operations plan is a project proposal, not a decision document. Following completion of the surveys and submission of construction and operations plan, BOEM conducts a review of the plan and decides if it's sufficient to begin the National Environmental Policy Act process. This stage of the process is where we are today and is identified in orange in this diagram. There is also a NEPA review box with a blue arrow pointing to the orange band in this diagram. Next slide, please. Empire Wind submitted their initial construction and operations plan on January 10th, 2020. With the most recent version of the proposal received partially in June, and then again, some updates were received this month in July. The construction and operations plan is the focus of the environmental review. At the conclusion of the environmental impact statement, a decision will be made to approve, disapprove, or approve with modification the construction and operations plan proposal through the issuance of a record of decision. For a copy of the Empire Wind construction and operations plan, please see the web's address listed here, www.boem.gov/empirewind. Next slide, please. The National Environmental Act is a law that requires federal agencies to assess the environmental effects of their proposed actions and reasonable alternatives prior to making decisions. As mentioned in the previous slide, the construction and operations plan proposal is the focus of this environmental review. The environmental impact statement will include both onshore and offshore components. Listed in this slide are BOEM's actions where the National Environmental Policy Act is applied during the decision-making process. They are as follows: at least issuance, including the survey work; for plan approvals, which includes the site assessment, construction and operations plan, or general activities plan; and prior to decommissioning activities. Next slide, please. The environmental review is a multi-step process that provides opportunities for public input. In the diagram provided, you will note the environmental impact statement process is anticipated to take approximately 24 months from start to finish. The National Environmental Policy Act process began at the issuance of the Notice of Intent on June 24th. June 24th is also the date that begins your first opportunity to provide input on the construction and operations plan proposal. The 30-day public scoping period began on the day the Notice of Intent was published in the Federal Register and will conclude on July 26th, 2021. Following the conclusion of the scoping period, BOEM, in coordination with our cooperating agencies, will begin the development of the draft environmental impact statement. Once the draft environmental impact statement has been completed, a notice of availability will be posted in the Federal Register and will begin our second opportunity for input. During this 45-day public review and comment period, several hearings will be held for the public to provide input on the draft environmental impact statement. At the conclusion of the draft environmental impact statement review period, BOEM and the cooperating agencies will address comments received from the public and begin writing the final environmental impact statement. Following the conclusion, excuse me, of the final environmental impact statement, a notice of availability will be issued in the Federal Register. A record of decision will be issued no sooner than 30 days following the notice of availability for the final environmental impact statement. Next slide, please. The notice of intent can be found at the following website. You can go to thefederalregister.gov and then type in 86-FR-33351, and you should be able to find it there. We can also put the website in the chat. Yes, thank you. All comments submitted through the environmental review will be available to you and found at regulations.gov under docket number BOEM-2021-0038. Next slide, please. The scoping period is your first opportunity to provide input and is an important stage of the National Environmental Policy Act process. Public comment submitted during the scoping period provides valuable local experience and perspectives that aids BOEM in its decision-making process. Public input, such as the raising of significant issues, sharing of information sources BOEM may not have considered, and recommendation of reasonable alternatives are critical inputs to the development of a well-informed draft environmental impact statement. Please note all comments must be received no later than July 26th for consideration. Next slide, please. Today's scoping meeting is the second of 3 virtual meetings. The dates and times for all 3 meetings are listed in this slide for your convenience. After today, our last meeting will be Tuesday, July 13th at 1 p.m. All meetings are being recorded and will be available to the public. The information provided in this meeting is the same for each public scoping meeting for this environmental review. I encourage you to go to the virtual meeting room website located at www.boem.gov/Empire Wind Scoping Virtual Meetings. Again, this website is posted in the chat. Here you will find additional information and resources on the proposal, such as fact sheets, project posters, and meeting information. It also includes directions on how to provide comments during this phase of the environmental review. Next slide, please. There are 3 ways you can provide input during the scoping period. In this meeting, you can provide comments by raising your hand within the Zoom platform. You may also submit your comments in writing and mail them to the address listed on this slide. If you prefer, you can submit your comments online at the following website at regulations.gov. And make sure you include the docket number, which we've mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. An environmental impact statement is a National Environmental Policy Act document meant to provide information to the public and federal government decision makers on the proposed action, alternatives to the proposed action, and an analysis of environmental impacts. Impacts identified during the environmental review may be either beneficial or adverse. For example, the route the transmission line could take to reach a substation from the wind farm, or how much distance between each wind turbine could be alternatives to the proposed action. The length of time to construct the wind farm is also an example. The environmental impact statement will include a no action alternative. Selection of the no action alternative would result in BOEM's disapproval of the construction and operations plan submitted by Empire Wind. If this alternative is selected, it does not mean that the wind farm would never be constructed in this lease area. It would mean that the construction and operations plan proposal BOEM is considering would not be approved. The environmental impact statement will include reasonably foreseeable environmental trends and planned actions other than those present in the construction and operations plan proposal. Next slide. The environmental impact statement analysis is a comprehensive look at the biological, physical, and socioeconomic impacts that may occur during the proposed construction, operation, and decommissioning of the wind farm. Examples of biological resources include marine mammals, bats, and birds. Impacts to physical resources include air and water quality. A few examples of socioeconomic resources that may be impacted are commercial fishing, tourism, cultural resources, climate change, visual resources, and environmental justice, just to name a few. The environmental review will be looking at all of these resources for both beneficial and adverse impacts. Next slide, please. What is a design envelope and why has BOEM approved this approach toward the construction and operations plan? A design envelope approach is a permitting approach that allows lessees the option to submit a reasonable range of design parameters within its construction and operations plan. Under these conditions, BOEM's environmental review would apply the upper limit of each design parameter to ensure the resources are being analyzed for the greatest potential impact. This allows BOEM to continue the environmental review process without having to pause and restart as the project is refined to the final design. A change to the project design parameter could be a change in wind turbine height. In this example, BOEM would analyze the impacts on each resource that would occur using the maximum potential height of the wind turbines to be installed. If Empire Wind chooses to construct wind turbines below the maximum height, the impacts would be less than those analyzed and those proposed in the construction and operations plan and environmental impact statement. An important note: revisions outside the design envelope would require additional review and consultation. Next slide, please. The environmental review will run concurrently with consultations. The consultations conducted under the environmental impact statement include Section 106 National Historic Preservation Act, Coastal Zone Management Act, Endangered Species Act, Marine Mammal Protection Act, and the Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation and Management Act, also known as EFH. Next slide, please. BOEM is implementing NEPA substitution for Section 106 review, mainly due to lessons learned from the earliest construction and operations plan consultations and reflections of stakeholder needs. This process provides a streamlined approach that better integrates National Historic Preservation Act and National Environmental Policy Act reviews, both thematically and in terms of schedule. It also provides lessees clear expectations of environmental review timelines and costs associated with mitigations. Using this process will provide consulting parties and stakeholders earlier and more direct input into the selection of alternatives and mitigation measures. The National Environmental Policy Act substitution approach will also help BOEM to engage with tribes more effectively and facilitate an increased focus on government-to-government consultations. Next slide, please. Oops. This diagram shows how the major National Historic Preservation Act Section 106 process milestones, highlighted in blue, light blue, are integrated into the NEPA process, which is shown in dark blue. Let's see. The diagram shows an example of early engagement can be seen with step number 1, which is initiation of Section 106 at the time of the notice of intent. Next slide, please. Through this process, BOEM is now seeking comment and input regarding identification of historic properties and/or potential effects of historic properties from activities associated with approval of the Empire Wind COP, reasonable alternatives such as size, geographic, or other restrictions on construction and siting of facilities and activities, and potential mitigation measures to be analyzed in the EIS, including ways to avoid, minimize, or otherwise treat and resolve adverse effects on historic properties. Next slide, please. The draft environmental impact statement is currently scheduled for release in summer of 2022. The Federal Register Notice of Availability will begin the 45-day public review and comment period. During this time, several public hearings will be held. The 45-day public review will provide you with the second opportunity to provide input into the National Environmental Policy Act process for the Empire Wind Construction and Operations Plan proposal. I hope that by this stage of the environmental review, things will have turned more to normal and we can have those hearings in person. The final environmental impact statement is currently scheduled for release in spring of 2023. A Federal Register notice of availability for the environmental impact statement will be released at that time. In the summer of 2023, BOEM anticipates concluding all consultations for the Empire Wind EIS and will then publish the record of decision. Next slide, please. In the last couple of minutes of my time today, I wanted to share some information about BOEM's Environmental Studies program. This program is intended to take a proactive approach to fund and complete studies that will aid BOEM in conducting environmental reviews. In these last two slides, I have provided a few examples of relevant studies to the Empire Wind lease area. If you would like to learn more about these studies, you can visit these websites found at boem.gov/renewable energy environmental studies. Next slide, please. And here's a couple more. And here's the website, and it's also posted in the chat. Thank you everyone for your time. And that concludes my presentation.
Great, thank you, Brandy, for that information and overview. We'll now hear from Laura McLean with the New York Department of State. Laura?
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Laura McLean. I'm a Coastal Energy Review Specialist with the New York State Department of State, which manages the New York State Coastal Management Program. Next slide, please. Oh, thank you. Great. Next slide, please. Thank you. So what I'll be talking today is about the New York State Coastal Consistency Review and provide you with an overview of what Federal Consistency Review is and how it applies to this project. So the Coastal Zone Management Act, or CZMA, was passed in 1972 to comprehensively manage uses and resources along the nation's coastal zone. And it was created at a time when there was rapid development and a high percentage of the population lived along the nation's coast. And there was also environmental stewardship movement that was coming into focus. And so what this act did was it created a state and federal partnership where coastal states could elect to create a comprehensive coastal management program. And federal consistency is one component of those coastal management programs. It provides states with this important tool that allows them to manage their own coastal uses and resources and to facilitate coordination with federal agencies. And so this quote here, what it speaks to is that federal actions that affect land or water uses or natural resources within that state's coastal zone must be consistent with the enforceable policies of that program. Next slide, please. So what this means is the core idea here is reverse federalism. So if a federal permit or authorization is required that could affect a coastal program's uses or resources, it must be found consistent with that coastal management program. And there's 4 types of federal actions that are subject to CZMA review. And Empire Wind, we expect, will have 2 types of coastal consistency reviews. One associated with the federal permitting, the Corps of Engineers permit, for example, and the second associated with the Outer Continental Shelf Plan for Renewable Energy, which is called the Construction and Operations Plan, or COP. And CZMA review is one means of implementing the state's coastal management plan. Next slide, please. Many coastal and Great Lakes states around the United States have federally approved coastal programs, and New York's program was approved and adopted in 1982. The program incorporates New York State Executive Article 42, as well as a wide range of other state laws into one set of enforceable coastal policies. And so there's 44 coastal policy statements that address a broad range of categories: development, energy, fish, wildlife, recreation. And so these policy statements, they speak to either promoting the beneficial use of these resources, preventing their impairment, or address major activities that could substantially affect these resources. And the coastal policy language that's provided in our coastal management program directs DOS as to how it should implement each of these policies. And one important thing is that there are 44 policies, and a project can't be inconsistent with any one of those policies. It must be consistent with all applicable policies. The coastal management program also defines the state's coastal area, which includes all tidal waters, Lake Ontario, Lake Erie, St. Lawrence, and Niagara rivers. And as you can see in yellow in the graphic, and the seaward boundary of the coastal area ends at the 3 nautical mile limit, which is the boundary of state territorial waters. And this is important for offshore wind projects because the state can actually review projects beyond the 3 nautical mile limit if the state can demonstrate reasonably foreseeable effects to its coastal uses and resources. Next slide, please. And while there are many applicable coastal policies of the 44 state coastal policies that are applicable to offshore wind and Empire Wind specifically, one of the primary ones that DOS anticipates using in federal waters is our Coastal Policy 29. And it speaks to the development, responsible development of offshore uses and resources in a manner that accommodates commercial recreational fishing, maritime commerce, and ecological functions of habitats important to New York. Our coastal management program also has various special management areas, and 2 of these we anticipate being used in our review of the Empire Wind project. One is the local waterfront revitalization programs, or LWRPs, and the other are the significant coastal fish and wildlife habitats. So LWRPs, for example, are localized versions of the state coastal policies that are adopted by municipalities to protect their unique places and to guide local development. New York City has a locally refined coastal management program, and that will be applicable for Empire Wind activities affecting New York City. Next slide. So what to expect in the consistency review process is that DOS plans to undertake 2 separate types of consistency reviews subject to different regulatory standards as outlined here. So both the construction and operations plan, or COP, and the Corps of Engineers applications that we'll be reviewing require an individual consistency review due to the size of this project, the complexity. And after each of these reviews begin, DOS will be coordinating with the LWRP. We'll be issuing public notice. And that public notice will be published in the New York State Register, as well as on Department of State's website. And links can be found at the end of my presentation. Throughout its review, DOS carefully evaluates the project to see if there exists the potential for significant coastal effects as guided by our 44 policies. And often DOS will request additional data and information to make that determination. And a few things to note about the difference here with the review of the COP is first that our review has already begun. We began review at the notice of intent, which BOEM published a few weeks ago, and DOS and Empire Wind have entered into what's called a stay agreement, which pauses our review, and we've agreed to pause that review until BOEM publishes the DEIS. Another important thing is that all information requests in our review of the COP must be made within the first 3 months of review, which in this case will be approximately 3 months after the DEIS is published. And so it's important for New York to act quickly and to solicit detailed feedback early in our review. So we'll be holding that public notice shortly after the DEIS is published as well. And the last thing to note in terms of differences between the way these 2 reviews work is that our COP decision on the COP is due within 3 to 6 months. So this review can be extended up to the 6-month timeframe if there's a basis for needing more time. Next slide. And when DOS has completed its review, it has the option of issuing either a concurrence or an objection to that could take any of these forms. So for the concurrence, it could be a straight concurrence with the submitted consistency certification or with modifications that are mutually agreed upon between DOS and the applicant. Or we could concur with conditions that DOS prepares, and those conditions are ones that are required for the project to be fully consistent with the state's coastal management program. If the applicant refuses to accept the conditions in a conditional concurrence, then that decision turns into an objection. Another type of objection is if there is insufficient information to determine the consistency with the state's coastal program. And for COPs that describe one or more federal permit activities, there could be an objection to one or more of those permit activities that are described in detail. And in all cases, whenever there is these types of objections, the state is encouraged to identify alternatives to that project that would make it fully consistent with the program. Next slide. And so DOS has created multiple online resources to learn more about our decision role. Here are some for highlighting Department of State links, as well as some other resources. And in particular, I want to call attention to the DOS Geographic Information Gateway, which is a one-stop shop for state data, federal, as well as regional data sets all in one place. So there's my contact information, as well as a mailbox for general inquiries to our program. And I want to thank you for your attention and this opportunity to discuss New York's coastal management program. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Laura, for that presentation. Our final presenter is Laura Morales, the permit manager for Empire Wind. Laura?
Thank you, Jennifer. Good evening, everyone. I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening to talk about the Empire Wind project and the BOEM environmental impact statement process. Next slide, please. Empire Offshore Wind LLC, or Empire, is a joint venture between Equinor Offshore Wind LLC and BP Wind Energy North America Incorporated. The lease area OCSA 0512 was awarded by BOEM on April 1st, 2017 through the leasing process outlined previously by Luke Feinberg. The lease area, which is approximately 80,000 acres in size, will offer more than 2 gigawatts of energy for New York through the success of the Offshore Renewable Energy Credit, or OREC, solicitations that occurred in both 2018 and 2020. We estimate first power to be provided approximately 2025, and that will support New York's goals for 9 gigawatts of offshore renewable energy by 2035. Next slide, please. So a project overview for Empire Wind. Again, it's the lease area OCSA 0512, which is located in the New York Bight, approximately 14 miles from Long Beach, New York, and approximately 19.5 miles from Long Branch, New Jersey. The construction operations plan conceives full build out of the lease area, which includes Empire Wind 1 and Empire Wind 2. Empire Wind 1, which is shown in yellow in this slide, and the approximate geographic extent within the lease area, consists of an 816 megawatt project, which was awarded with the New York RFP in July of 2019. And it consists of 2 submarine export cable routes with interconnection into Gowanus, New York, reflected by the yellow cable route in the map there. You'll see with the map as well, with the yellow cable route, there's a solid yellow line and a few dotted lines. And those dotted lines are essentially some route variants that are being explored for the submarine export cable route as we continue to evaluate the data that's collected. So both of those areas, all of those areas, I'm sorry, are considered within the construction and operations plan. Back one slide, please. Yeah, thank you. Empire Wind 2, which is shown in the purple, that is a New York RFP award in January 2021. That project is 1,260 megawatts and will consist of 3 submarine export cables connecting into Long Island, New York, with an interconnection into Oceanside, New York. And again, you'll see the purple route, which is the submarine export cable proposed for Empire Wind 2, with a number of landfall locations being considered. And I'll go into detail with that in a little bit. Next slide, please. When you go to BOEM's website, and again, that website was provided in earlier presentations, and you go into the Empire Wind project, you'll see the construction and operations plan for the project. Under Volume 1, you'll find the executive summary, the project design development, and the project description. The project design development is essentially outlining how Equinor and Empire have evaluated different siting alternatives as well as different technology alternatives for the sports project design envelope. And the project description is the details of the project design envelope. So the dimensions associated with the facilities that are being proposed, as well as the final locations for siting that is considered within the construction and operations plan. Volume 2 are the resource chapters, where 2A are the physical resources, 2B are the biological resources, 2C are the cultural resources, 2D are the visual resources, and 2E are the human resources and the built environment. And you'll see the associated resource chapters under each one of those areas. And in Volume 3, there are approximately 30 different technical appendices that are the detailed assessments and analyses that support the chapters within Volume 2. Next slide, please. A little bit more detail on the onshore facilities for each phase of the Empire Wind project. So for Empire Wind 1, again, the submarine export cable leaves the lease area and enters into New York State waters. And then into New York Harbor. On the picture on the right, you'll see the zoom in where, as mentioned before, there are a couple route variants under consideration, specifically in the Gravesend Bay area, as we evaluate that against some of the existing maritime uses, such as federal navigational channels and federal anchorages. The submarine export cable then traverses north into the Narrows and further north into a landfall in northern Brooklyn, in Sunrise Park at the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal. We are also proposing the onshore substation to be located at South Brooklyn Marine Terminal, as well as the operations and maintenance base that will support both Empire Wind 1 and Empire Wind 2. After reaching the onshore substation where the power is converted, there will be an interconnection cable installed underground to the point of interconnection, which is the Gowanus substation, just a hop across 2nd Avenue. Next slide, please. For Empire Wind 2, we are looking at a number of landfall alternatives to host the 3 submarine export cables. Only 2 of these, up to 2 of these sites will be used to host the 3 cables. Once landfall is made, we are looking at a number of different onshore routing alternatives where the cable will move across Reynolds Channel from the barrier island to the mainland, continue north to a substation location where we currently are evaluating 2 different alternatives, substation A or substation B. Only one of those sites will be utilized, and then an interconnection cable route to the point of interconnection, which is Oceanside, located on the National Grid property in Island Park. Next slide, please. Briefly on submarine export cable and inter-array cables, the installation methods include pre-lay methodology, including grapnel runs, which is debris removal, pre-sweeping with a suction hopper dredge or a mass flow excavator or MFE, pre-trenching and dredging at the landfall or other areas. For cable lay and burial, we include tools within the project design envelope, including plowing, jetting, and trenching, or otherwise known as cutting. For target burial depths, we are targeting 15 feet below the current or future authorized depth or the existing depth within federally maintained areas. And those are the channels and the anchorages, which I mentioned earlier. And that would be whichever is deeper of those 3 different parameters. And outside of those federal areas, we are targeting 6 feet along the entire export cable route, as well as the inter-array cables, which will be installed within the lease area. Next slide, please. Moving offshore for the proposed facilities, for wind turbines, the project design envelope includes a maximum dimension for wind turbines, as shown here on the left. For wind turbine foundations, as well as offshore substation foundations, wind turbine foundations, we have a gravity-based structure and a monopile foundation in the project design envelope. And for the pile jacket foundation, we maintain a single foundation, which is the piled jacket foundation. Next slide, please. As far as layouts of the wind turbines and the offshore substations, Empire Wind has developed a number of layout rules, which can be found in Section 3, Volume 1 of the Construction Operations Plan. Those have been developed through consultation with fisheries, maritime stakeholders, and previous experiences in other offshore wind projects that we have developed. We've voluntarily applied these to the project, and they're essentially a roadmap or road rules for our engineers when we talk about layouts for the wind farm. They're designed to provide flexibility on timing and design of final layouts, but with known and assessed limits. They are the rules that, they're rules that do reduce navigational risk and are facilitate continued access to traditional fishing grounds. They do consider safety as well as including search and rescue operations implemented by the Coast Guard. And we've used these rules in the development of the Navigational Safety Risk Assessment, which is a detailed document found at Appendix DD of the Construction Operations Plan. And again, within Section 3 of the COP, you'll find these 9 rules, which are adopted as part of the project design envelope and evaluated in the Construction Operations Plan. The image to the right provides some examples of the layout rules, and some examples of that include easily understandable patterns, boundary clarity, i.e. straight lines along the boundary for navigational purposes, a minimum turbine spacing of approximately 0.7 nautical miles, and orientation that considers the dominant trawling that occurs within the lease area, which is from the southwest to the northeast, following along the bathymetric contours. Next slide, please. So as far as the layout that was analyzed in the COP, we've taken those layout rules and established a layout within those rules. This picture here shows you an image of that with the wind farm development area maintaining that 1 nautical mile setback from the traffic separation scheme and traffic lanes described previously by Luke when he described the development of this lease area. It includes up to 174 wind turbine foundation locations within both EW1 or Empire Wind 1 and Empire Wind 2. There are 2 offshore substations within the foundation locations, one substation for Empire Wind 1 and 1 substation for Empire Wind 2. And again, it's through the implementation of these layout rules where we've established this COP layout, which is evaluated for each of the resources outlined in Volume 2 of the COP. Next slide, please. Additionally, part of our project design, of course, includes marking and lighting for safe navigation. These are some of the guidance documents that were utilized, but that will be utilized in the development of the lighting and marking of our facilities within the lease area. Next slide, please. Also wanting to highlight volumes 1, 2, and the appendices. So the COP in its entirety was recently updated to reflect the following project design envelope refinements, and it's now available on the BOEM website. The project design envelope refinements recently implemented include the reduction of the number of foundations from 1 to 1, actually that's a typo, excuse me. The reduction of the number of foundations to 176. So it was originally 240. The incorporation of a layout for those 176 foundation locations. And again, that layout shown in the previous slide reflects that. The removal of the minimum sized wind turbine. So you only have a maximum sized wind turbine as shown again in an earlier slide. And the removal of the pile jacket foundation as an option to support the wind turbines. So this is a little snippet of, again, what you'll see on the BOEM website, which with each of these documents being uploaded on July, I guess it was yesterday, actually, the most recent update, reflecting these PDE updates. Next slide, please. In addition to that, we have future plan filings. These appendices and the associated resource chapters are being updated in accordance with an agreed upon schedule with BOEM to either reflect the PDE refinements because they take a little bit longer to work through, or by nature of compiling the large amount of data that's been collected through the survey portion of the assessments that we've been doing. So for instance, the Marine Site Investigation Report, which is the compilation of all the geotech and geophysical data that we've collected within the lease area and along our cable or proposed cable routes, will be provided to BOEM in February of 2022. A number of the appendices will be provided to BOEM in September of 2021, with the last submittal being provided to BOEM in November of 2021 in support of the marine mammal assessments. And each one of these appendices and the associated chapters reflect that this is an ongoing update, and they will be provided to BOEM. Next slide, please. So that concludes my presentation. Again, thank you very, very much for joining us this evening. Looking forward to hearing your questions and comments, and I'll hand this over to Jennifer.
Great, thanks, Laura. And thank you to all of our presenters this evening. In just a minute, we'll take a quick break to let everyone stretch their legs before we begin the formal public comment session of the evening. As a reminder, please feel free to continue to type any questions that you would like to have clarified in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Following the public comments, we'll have time for BOEM representatives to respond to your questions. We will stop taking new clarifying questions at the close of the public comment portion of today's meeting. I will note that any questions submitted to the Q&A will not be considered as formal scoping comments for the NEPA process. So if you wish to make a formal comment, please either plan to speak today or submit your comments through regulations.gov or through the US mail. At this point, we'll take a 5-minute break. We'll reconvene at 6:12 Eastern. Thank you so much. We'll be back in 5 minutes. Hey folks, welcome back. I think we're ready to start with the public comment portion of today's meeting. As a reminder, I'll call on the people who registered to make a comment when they registered. All names will be called in the order in which we received your registration. After all of those folks have commented, I will ask if anyone else would like to make a comment and be added to the list. You then raise your hand using the Zoom platform feature, or if you're calling in from the phone, you'll type *9 to raise your hand. I'll call on people to comment in the order in which they raise their hand. During the comment period, I will post the names of the next 5 speakers in the chat so you can see when your turn is coming. When I call your name, you'll receive a pop-up box on your screen that will allow you to unmute yourself to make a comment. Sometimes that pop-up box gets hidden if you have several other windows open on your computer. So I would recommend closing any extra open windows now. If you're calling in from a phone, you will hear a prompt to press *6 to unmute your line. So again, for the phone users, *9 to raise your hand, and then you'll press *6 to unmute your line. Please remember that if you have clarifying questions, you can still type those into the question and answer box on your Zoom platform. We will stop taking new questions once we are finished with the public comment period and portion of tonight's meeting. So be sure to submit any questions you have as soon as you're able to. Please note, when we receive your question and the team begins working on an answer, we'll move your question to the dismissed category, and then once ready, we will read your question and provide an answer aloud. A couple of ground rules for all of us to follow during the comment period today. First, please limit your comments to no more than 5 minutes. I'll post a timer on the screen to help keep track of time. At the end of your time, I will ask you to quickly wrap up your comments to allow others the opportunity to comment tonight. If you're not able to complete your comments within the allotted time, you may still submit them in writing before the end of the public scoping comment period, which ends on July 26, 2021. Second, please be respectful towards everyone who provides comments during today's meeting. You each have unique and valued perspectives, and no one comment is considered more important than the other. Comments that are directed to or about another commenter are not in line with the intent of tonight's meeting and will not be allowed. Should any comments or actions begin to distract the purpose of this public scoping meeting tonight, the speaker may be placed on mute or removed from the online platform. Thank you for following the ground rules. And lastly, I apologize in advance for mispronouncing anyone's name this evening. The names of the first 5 commenters have been posted in the chat box. I will now read those names aloud. And ask that you please raise your hand and use the button at the bottom of your screen, or press *9 if you dialed in by phone. I will call the names of the people who have raised their hand, and you will receive a prompt or pop-up box, and you can unmute. Please be sure to state your first and last name and affiliation and make your comment. The first 5 speakers are Mariah Dignam, Caroline Hahn, Nadia Holmbunchitsi, David Wallace, and Shay O'Reilly. Okay, Mariah, I see your hand. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Go ahead. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Mariah Dignan, and I'm the Long Island organizer for Climate Jobs New York. CJNY is a growing coalition of labor unions representing 2.6 million working New Yorkers organizing to combat climate change and income inequality. CJNY is dedicated to building a clean energy economy, creating good union jobs, and supporting more equitable communities and a more resilient New York. I appreciate the opportunity to submit oral comments on the Empire Wind 1 and 2 projects and thank BOEM for announcing the notice of intent to prepare an EIS. As we emerge from the COVID crisis, BOEM is doing the necessary work to move offshore wind forward. We are undeniably addressing intersectional crises. Inequality, the economy, environmental justice, and climate change are interwoven with offshore wind development. At a moment when we must make large-scale investments to restart our economy, we should take action on clean energy at the level we know we need to take on climate change. We have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to put ourselves on the path to a low-carbon future while creating new quality careers that provide family-sustaining wages and benefits for communities across the nation. We can help launch that potential with Empire Wind 1 and 2. To maximize the economic development and job opportunities in offshore wind, the industry and its future workforce needs confidence that demand in the U.S. offshore wind market is real. This means we need to move forward promptly in the permitting process to set the stage for this nascent industry. By kickstarting this now, the potential for additional jobs multiplies exponentially for hundreds of thousands of good-paying jobs across the United States. For the New York region, the New York Energy Research and Development Authority forecasts that New York's 5 awarded offshore wind projects will create 6,800 family-sustaining jobs, power 2.4 million homes, and have over $12 billion in economic impact across the state. Empire Wind 1 and 2 will power over 1 million homes and provide nearly 2 gigawatts of clean renewable energy into New York's grid. To achieve the goals of New York's nation-leading climate law, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, we need to further projects like Empire Wind. As we are creating this industry, we must ensure the jobs created are good, family-sustaining union jobs, not only in the construction and installation of projects, but across the supply chain and operations and maintenance of offshore wind farms. Climate Jobs New York supports Empire Wind's prioritization of port development in New York. The South Brooklyn Marine Terminal, located in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, is where the operations and maintenance base for Empire Wind will be located. It also serves as New York's first offshore wind marshaling and assembly port, a game changer for the industrial waterfront in Sunset Park. A total of $286 million is being invested in SBMT towards port improvements, representing $126 million from the state and $160 million in private funds and New York City Economic Development Corporation support. Empire Wind expects to see 200 long-term O&M jobs from the SBMT facility, but we must prioritize good jobs with family-sustaining wages and benefits for community members in order to put us on the path to address environmental justice. Empire Wind is also partnering with New York to be the first to build the towers to support offshore wind turbines. Equinor is combining forces with 2 other industry companies at the Port of Albany to help it become America's first offshore wind tower and transition piece manufacturing facility, where it will produce components for Equinor's projects, including Empire Wind. The Port of Albany stands to become a go-to destination for future projects to source offshore wind towers, transition pieces, and other manufacturing components for years to come as the projects grow along the East Coast. This is a significant manufacturing opportunity for New Yorkers. The related onshore transmission upgrades to handle the load from Empire Wind is vastly needed for both New York City and Long Island. By investing in our electrical grid, we can create a resilient energy infrastructure for decades to come. Additionally, Empire Wind and the previous leaseholder Equinor Wind have and continue to conduct numerous geotechnical surveys and samplings to inform project design and engineering. This allows for flexibility to advance the most environmentally sound submarine export cable routes. We look forward to learning more about the proposed interconnection points into the Gowanus and Barrett substations and the related environmental and local impacts. I urge BOEM to follow the current permitting schedule for this project and to move forward expeditiously on this and other offshore wind projects. The only way to achieve 9,000 megawatts of offshore wind energy by 2035, New York's goal, is to advance permitting in a timely manner and develop safe and fair conditions with community stakeholders.
That's 5 minutes. Please wrap up your comments.
Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you for your comments. Our next commenter is Caroline Hahn. I'll ask you to unmute.
Good evening. My name is Caroline Hahn, and I'm here tonight representing the New York League of Conservation Voters, or NYLCV. NYLCV is committed to renewable energy and a clean energy future for New York, and offshore wind is one of our top priorities. Thank you for providing this opportunity to comment tonight. Offshore wind is critical to meet New York's renewable energy goals, reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, and rebuild around a green energy economy, which will provide family-supporting jobs and improve public health. New York has committed to 70% renewable energy by 2030 and 100% clean energy by 2040, including 9,000 megawatts of offshore wind. We are excited to see Empire Wind by Equinor move forward, which in total will generate nearly 2 gigawatts of clean power, enough to power over 1 million New York homes and help New York to meet our ambitious climate energy goals. NYLCB is committed to ensuring that New Yorkers and communities that will be home to energy infrastructure are presented with transparent information about offshore wind projects and processes. NYLCB strongly supports the advancement of the Empire Wind projects. We believe Empire Wind provides a critical opportunity for wind development with minimal impacts to our ocean resources and other ocean users. Equinor is undertaking numerous in-depth scientific studies on ocean health, marine mammals, maritime safety, and new technology. Importantly, Equinor is working with well-regarded science-based partners such as the Wildlife Conservation Society and the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute to ensure the project has minimal impact on whale habitat and migration. Offshore wind will help reduce our reliance on polluting power plants, which are often located in or proximate to disadvantaged communities who have borne the brunt of air pollution and other negative impacts caused by living near these power plants. By generating clean, renewable energy, offshore wind farms like Empire Wind will help alleviate the burden placed on these communities by their polluting neighbors. We support Empire Wind's commitment to creating job opportunities and economic development in some of these communities like Sunset Park, Brooklyn. Offshore wind has the potential to drive post-pandemic economic recovery and stimulate economies up and down the East Coast. Specifically, the Empire Wind projects will result in approximately $2.7 billion in investment in New York State throughout the lifetime of the projects. Additionally, there is deep and diverse stakeholder support for sustainable offshore wind among local, environmental, and labor organizations in New York, and NYLCB is proud to be included in these groups. Thank you for the opportunity to testify about this important project today.
Thank you for your comments. Our next speaker is David Wallace. David, I'll ask you to unmute.
Yes, my name is David Wallace. I represent the clam fishery in the Northeast United States. We have had a number of governors who have advocated that wind energy and ocean wind energy and the clam and the fishing industry can coexist without harming each other. The clam industry is unique in that its directed fishery is in the types of substrates that can only exist with being able to drive piles deep into the substrates in soft bottom without a lot of heavy rocks. So where we operate and where our critters live is being negatively impacted by will be negatively impacted by the wind energy development of thousands of wind turbines, both in the Mid-Atlantic Bight and New England. We have proposed on numerous occasions to separate those turbines 2 nautical miles by 2 nautical miles apart in straight lines so that we could operate within those turbine arrays. However, we have found that none of the developers are interested or willing to spread their turbines out, even though they thought that they could get 800 megawatts out of a lease area. And now with the greatly expanded power of the new turbines, they can get up to 2 times that amount of power, which means that they are going to generate twice as much revenue as they thought that they could, but unfortunately at the fishery's expense. We plan on making this very clear to both the states and to the public that we are not interested in being collateral damage to very high rates of electric utilities and forcing us to fish in marginal areas. And if there are no marginal areas to fish, then we essentially go out of business, but our costs go up dramatically. We have proposed on numerous occasions to be financially provided, considered by the developers and BOEM and the federal government and the state governments to provide assistance for the fishing industry, both in loss of fishing grounds and in gear loss or damage due to attempting to fish within the arrays, and the cables, which are extremely difficult for clam dredges, clam vessels, because they dig into the substrates. And if the cables are not very deep enough, they could come in contact with these cables, of which we and the developers do not want to happen. Excuse me. So we have proposed that the developers put up X numbers of dollars per megawatt per year to take care of loss of fishing grounds, and the reimbursement to legitimate fishermen who have lost or damaged gear due to these wind farms. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak, and we will provide written details at the end of this comment period. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Okay, that's all of the commenters from the first round who are wishing to provide a oral comment tonight. So I'll move on to the next 5, which are Kevin Costa, Tara Noble, Lee Tozer, Michael Halpern, and Tom Baraka. If you would please press *9 or raise your hand so we can identify you and call on you. Okay, Tara Noble, I see your hand. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Go ahead. You have 5 minutes.
Great. My name is Tara Noble. I am a
Tara, you have gone back on mute again. I'm going to ask you to unmute again.
All right, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Go ahead and restart.
Sorry about that. My name is Tara Noble. I'm a lifelong resident of New York, and I am joining today just as a member of the public, because after yet another record-breaking and deadly month of heat waves, it seems to me that our absolute #1 priority for all energy projects should be simply, do they help us get to a carbon neutral future? And if the answer is yes, then we are obligated to pursue them without delay. Of course, I would also like to see these projects go forward in a way that preserves our existing environment and supports a strong and just economy for all. And I appreciate the work that has already been done to that end. Now I urge all those involved to avoid delay, because ultimately there is no greater threat to fish, birds, local communities, coastlines, and the ocean itself than climate change. And getting renewables online quickly is the only option we have. That's it for me, so I'll keep it brief, but thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Great. Thank you for your comments. The next hand I see is Tom Baraka. Tom, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
I've also been an energy professional for about 30 years, primarily.
Tom, I'm going to interrupt you. We weren't able to hear you at the beginning, so go ahead and restart your comments.
Sorry about that. Yeah, just looked like it muted myself again. I'm a resident of East Meadow, New York. I've been a longtime resident of Long Island, as well as downstate New York. I've also been a longtime energy professional in this space, particularly Long Island, working for utilities and energy companies. About 20 years ago, I was involved as a program manager for the 2002 LIPA offshore wind study that was co-sponsored by NYSERDA. So I'm very, very excited and happy to see the Empire Wind project go forward, because that project that I was involved with 20 years ago laid some of the groundwork for this project. And although the offshore wind economics and technology wasn't there 20 years ago, it is today. And I think Equinor and the Empire Wind team have done a tremendous job in planning these projects and making the necessary studies and due diligence. And when issues were raised by the stakeholders, for example, the number of turbines were reduced and reducing the footprint of the project in terms of impact. I think that's just goes to show their responsiveness to the stakeholders. In addition, I'm a former reliability engineering manager for National Grid when they were under the LIPA agreement. And I'm very, very supportive of the delivery plan of the 2,000 megawatts of clean power into the New York, Con Edison territory, as well as the LIPA load pocket that they are going to bring in Southwest Nassau County. As many people might know, that there's an aging power plant, the E.F. Barrett plant in Island Park, that's been upgraded many times, and it is still operating. And National Grid's to be commended to make the best use of that. But quite frankly, it's time for renewable power to be brought into Long Island and into New York City. And Empire's plan to inject clean power into those two load pockets is perfect timing in the next couple of years. In addition, I've been involved in energy-related research and development and innovations. And I would note that Equinor has done a tremendous job looking at the best technology to be deployed in this area, and significant economic benefits would accompany these projects. Clearly, there's a great economic impact for the downstate New York region, and several $1 billion worth of impact to the stakeholders, and in addition to creating many job years of employment and many good paying jobs. So once again, I just in summary, would like to support the project as both a resident of East Meadow, which is north of the project, as a beachgoer to these beaches. I'm looking forward to seeing the turbines out there someday in the distance. And as an energy professional, it makes good economic and sense for Long Island and for New York State. So thank you very much for the opportunity to testify, and I appreciate it.
Thank you for your comments. Michael Halpern, you're next. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Hello, can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Go ahead. You have 5 minutes.
Yes, I am very concerned about the construction of this wind farm. Tomorrow, 19 years ago, my mother, Diane Halpern, left this world. I scattered her ashes on October 29th, 2019. The grief is so unbearable that it really affects my health and sleeping these days. I saw the construction of the power line of Riverside Boulevard, where my mother has a memorial bench there. In my faith, we do not usually cremate, but my mother chose a cremation. And this is the last thing that I have to see of her, where a bench says, "Life is a miracle." And I am looking at a picture of my dear, sweet mother, bless her soul, Allah Shalem, that it really would disturb me to see these wind turbines off the coast there, where it's almost like I can really be with her. Now, the one thing that she left me behind this world is a monthly Social Security check, which is how I'm able to live to this day to speak. And I've drawn a lot of pictures for people in Long Beach. I'm an artist for the Long Beach Art League, sold arts in the plaza, and I drew a lot of pictures of the ocean, and to the point where I drew pictures of the resurrection and revelation and the second coming taking place in Long Beach. And I'm really disturbed by the presence of these wind turbines, that this view of eternity is blocked by our humanly needs. I am not totally against clean energy at all. I, in fact, am in support of building solar panels on top of people's roofs and wind turbines in specific places, but not here off the coast of Long Beach, New York, and in New York City. It really disturbs me to see the speed of this progress going. I wish this thing were not built, and please do not build a wind turbine on this site where I last saw my mother. It is sacrilegious. I wish I could be a little softer here, but please try to understand the sympathy that I have here. This memorial benches in Long Beach is like no other place in America. There's 722 memorial benches. People come here to cremate and scatter the ashes of their loved ones, which I really don't support at all. But the fact is that this is the last thing that I have to look at my mother. And I want this view that she had when she was a little girl looking at Long Beach. My grandfather, here her father, my grandfather had when he was sailing on the merchant marine tanks in Long Beach. And with my great grandmother, her grandmother, looking out there in the nursing home in Long Beach. And I look out at this same view, and my children will look at the same view, and my grandchildren and great-grandchildren and so forth and so on. I want something that I had to last for many generations, and I really fear that these wind turbines are going to really take that away, really take the magic of going to the beach away, and I'm not going to be looking out at eternity and God's presence. I'm instead going to be looking at an industrial wasteland. Please try to understand the concerns here, because I'm really afraid that this is being shoved down my throat without respecting the wishes of people who live here. I do want to warn about this, and this is all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments and sympathies for your loss. Our next speakers are David Ristal and Michael Stalker. If you would please raise your hand so we can identify you and call on you. Okay, David, I see your hand. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
All right. Thank you so much for having me. I live in Brooklyn, and my wife and I have been talking about having children. I want to be a father, but I honestly, I'm afraid of what the world's gonna look like in the not too distant future. We're already seeing the effects of climate change with droughts, heat waves, intense storms. And obviously we all know this is just the beginning. And I think about what my kids will ask me one day, like what did I do? And I don't really have a great answer to those kids very often. I volunteer for different organizations, but then something like this comes along, and this is something we can do. We can put this empire, wind off of our shores and cut pollution and cut our reliance on carbon in our city. And I think it'll start, I guess a speaker earlier said, a nascent industry that needs our support, that has a huge future, that's going to have great jobs for people and good union jobs, while also being good for the environment and something we can be proud of and point to our children. So I'm calling in support of the wind projects, and thank you so much for the time.
Thank you for your comments. Ladies and gentlemen, those are all of the pre-registered speakers that we're seeing on the Zoom this evening or have raised their hand. If we by chance missed you, please raise your hand, or if you're on the phone line, press *9 to raise your hand. Okay, not seeing any hands raised. If you did not pre-register but would like to make a comment, I would ask that you please raise your hand using the hand raise button on the Zoom platform, or dial *9 if you called in via phone. I will call your name in the order in which you raise your hand, and you'll receive a pop-up box asking you to unmute. If you dialed in by phone, please use *6 to unmute and remute. Would anyone else like to make a public comment this evening? Okay, at this point, I don't see any additional hands raised to provide public scoping comments. As we've discussed previously, you can submit your comments through regulations.gov or through the US mail by July 26, 2021. Let's take another quick 5-minute break. And when we return, the BOEM representatives will provide answers to the clarifying questions that have been typed into the question and answer box during tonight's meeting. At this point, we're not taking any new clarifying questions. BOEM subject matter experts will respond to previously submitted questions when we return. Let's go ahead and break, and we will resume at 6:48 Eastern. Thank you. Okay, folks, thanks for rejoining. We can go ahead and get started. I'll read out the questions that have been posted through the question and answer box, and one of our BOEM representatives will come on camera and provide a response. As a reminder, at this point, we are not accepting any new questions. We will be responding to questions that you have raised during the meeting tonight. The first question this evening it's a series of questions actually from John Lang. The first question in the series is, what is the anticipated CTV mean transit speed from mainland port to lease area for routine operational transits? Kyle Baker, over to you for a response.
Yeah, thanks, John. Yeah, CTV is crude transfer vessel. And BOEM recently completed a study that characterizes vessel strike risk to marine mammals. So that's a really good question. This study is OCS study number 2021-034. It's called Risk Assessment to Model Encounter Rates Between Large Whales and Sea Turtles and Vessel Traffic from Offshore Wind Energy on the Atlantic OCS. And it characterizes crude transfer vessels to transit at 25 knots between a port and a lease area, and to travel at 17 knots between wind turbines within the lease area. And that study can be found at the link that is being put into the chat. Thanks.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Kyle. Okay, our next question is also from John Lang, which is section 4.2.3 of Form BOEM 0008 stipulates that the leasee must ensure that all vessel operators comply with 10-knot speed restrictions in any DMA. Question, does this stipulation apply to CTVs? Kyle, over to you.
Okay, thanks, John. Another good question. And for everybody else, section 4.2.3 refers to the condition or the stipulation in the lease issued by BOEM to Empire Wind. The lease conditions apply to all lease activities that occur prior to approval of a construction and operations plan. So sort of all the survey activities and geophysical surveys and other surveys that occur to gather information to support a COP. So to answer the question, the lease conditions do not apply to crew transfer vessels because no CTVs would be used before approval of a construction and operations plan. However, BOEM will request consultation with the National Marine Fisheries Service under the Endangered Species Act on vessel operations associated with the Empire Wind COP. During this project-specific consultation, the risk of vessel strikes from the different types of vessels proposed in the COP, including crew transfer vessels, will be assessed, and any mitigation and monitoring conditions required for right whales will be closely looked at. This assessment will include the potential risk from all the different types of vessels and all different sizes of vessels.
Hey, thank you, Kyle. So I apologize if anyone saw the surprise look on my face while you were answering. I actually live in California and we just had an earthquake. So everything just started moving. Okay, looks like we're good. Moving on to John Lang's third question, which is, it appears CTVs are designed to circumvent lease stipulation 4.2.4. The leasee must ensure that vessels 19.8 meters or 65 feet in length or greater operating from November 1st through April 30th operate at speeds of 10 knots or less. Question, is the risk of vessel strike to right whales comparable for a 60-foot vessel and a 65-foot vessel, each traveling at 20 knots? Kyle, over to you on that one as well.
Yeah, first with the vessel size, Appendix K of the COP, it's the air emissions appendix. In that appendix, you can find all of the different types of vessels and the size of the vessels that Empire Wind has proposed and included in the COP. The vessel dimensions of crew transfer vessels found in that appendix are indicated to be 65 feet long, 17 feet wide, and have a draft or depth of 5 feet. below the water surface. Studies have shown that any size vessel is capable of striking a whale. And so we will take that into account in our analysis. Yeah, the lease stipulation does apply to NOAA's speed reduction rule that only does apply to 65 feet or greater sized vessels. But as mentioned in my previous response to comment, we will be looking at all types of vessels and all sizes of vessels in our consultation with NOAA. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle. Okay, our next question is from Michael Halpern, which is, how far has this wind farm project planning come along? I believe that question is for Luke Feinberg. Luke?
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Michael, for your question. As described in some of the initial presentations, BOEM's planning process for this lease area began in 2010. And BOEM has recently initiated the environmental review process for the wind facility proposed in the lease area by Empire Wind. And so that's sort of the latter quarter of the process. And Empire Wind submitted a construction and operations plan, or COP, and that plan describes all the facilities Empire Wind proposes to construct and use for its project, along with all the proposed activities included in construction, the commercial operations, and conceptual decommissioning plans. And within that COP, they describe the construction process to conclude for the last portion, EW2, in 2027.
Okay, thank you, Luke. All right, our next and what looks like our final question of the night is from Dave Rubenton. And the question is, it looks like the cable might run directly below my property in Long Beach. How far below the ground will these cables run, and what kind of impact, noise, vibration, etc., can be expected both during the dredging and during the operation? Looks like Sam Deans and also Angel McCoy will both provide some responses to that question. Sam?
I'll be answering the questions regarding noise. Analysis of onshore noise impacts from the export cable landfall work area is presented in Appendix L of the COP. Sound levels at the shoreline from vibratory pile driving of cofferdams for both landfalls are modeled to be 62 dBA. According to Appendix L, these sound levels will be perceived as lower than a passenger vehicle traveling at 65 miles per hour at a distance of 25 feet. Noise from horizontal directional drilling, HDD, at multiple locations in Long Beach have been assessed and are presented in Appendix L as contour maps and in tabular form. There's also some results for specifically to the question on dredging. Angel?
Thank you very much, Sam. And so to answer your question regarding the cable burial depths, so both the onshore export cables and the internet connection cables will be buried to a target depth of about 3 feet beneath the surface along the onshore cable routes. And then the submarine cables, just in case you were wondering, they will be buried to depths of 4 to 6 feet in the federally maintained channels. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers requires that those cable burial depths be about 15 feet. And in consideration of cable burial depths, the cable burial risk assessment will provide any further guidance that may be necessary regarding the depths of the cable burial. And that's all I have.
Okay, great. Thanks, Angel and Sam. Appreciate it. All right, folks, those are all of the questions that we received this evening. in the question answer box. So at this point, I'll turn things over to Michelle Morin from BOEM for a few closing remarks. Michelle.
Thank you, Jennifer. Again, my name is Michelle Morin, and I am the Chief of the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management's Environment Branch for Renewable Energy. So thank you, Jennifer, and the ICF and BOEM staff for holding the second of our 3 public meetings for the Empire Wind Environmental Impact Statement. I think we had a really good turnout. It was a little less than last week's meeting, peaking around 100 attendees. Our third and last meeting, it will be Tuesday, July 13th at 1 p.m. And thank you to everybody that spent these last few hours of your evening with us. We had a lot of thoughtful comments and questions, and I hope you found this format helpful to learn about the project and to share your thoughts on the alternatives and issues that we should consider in the environmental impact statement. As Brandy described in her presentation at the beginning of the meeting, there will be an additional comment period and more public meetings after we publish the draft environmental impact statement in the summer of 2022. And I think we all share the same goal in that we want the best informed decision possible with regards to this proposal. So your input's really essential to accomplishing that. So thank you again for participating in this evening's meeting, and we encourage you to submit any additional comments by the end of the comment period, which closes on July 26th. And thank you.
Thank you, Michelle, and this meeting is adjourned.